of enormous challenges, I report today on a British economy which is proving the doubters wrong. In the autumn, we took difficult decisions to deliver stability and sound money. Since mid-October, 10-year gilt rates have fallen, debt servicing costs are down, mortgage rates are lower, and inflation has peaked. The International Monetary Fund says our approach means the UK economy is on the right track. Yeah. But we remain vigilant and will not hesitate to take whatever steps are necessary for economic stability. Today, the Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts that because of changing international factors and the measures I take, the UK will not now enter a technical recession this year. Yeah. They forecast we will meet the Prime Minister's priorities to halve inflation, reduce debt and get the economy growing. We are following the plan and the plan is working. But that's not all we've done. In the face of a cost of living crisis, we have demonstrated our values by protecting struggling families with a £2,500 energy price guarantee, one-off support and the uprating of benefits with inflation. Taken together, these measures are worth £94 billion over this year and next, one of the largest support packages in Europe. That averages, Madam Deputy Speaker, over £3,300 of cost of living help for every household in the country. Today, we deliver the next part of our plan, a budget for growth. Not just the growth that comes when you emerge from a downturn, but long-term, sustainable, healthy growth that pays for our NHS and schools, finds jobs for young people and provides a safety net for older people, all whilst making our country one of the most prosperous in the world. Prosperity with a purpose, and that is why growth is one of the Prime Minister's 5 priorities for our country. I deliver that today by removing obstacles that stop businesses investing, by tackling labour shortages that stop them recruiting, by breaking down barriers that stop people working, and by harnessing British ingenuity to make us a science and technology superpower. I start with the forecasts produced by Richard Hughes and his team at the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, who I thank for their diligent work. They have looked in detail at the Prime Minister's economic priorities. The first of those is to halve inflation. Inflation destroys the value of hard-earned pay, deters investment and foments industrial strife. This government remains steadfast in its support for the Independent Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England as it takes action to return inflation to the 2% target. Despite continuing global instability, the OBR report today that inflation in the UK will fall from 10.7% in the final quarter of last year to 2.9% by the end of 2023. That is more than halving inflation. High inflation, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the root cause of the strikes we've seen in recent months. We will continue to work hard to settle those disputes, but only in a way that does not fuel inflation. Part of the fall in inflation predicted by the OBR happens because of additional measures I take today. Firstly, I recognise that even though wholesale energy prices have been falling, there is still enormous pressure on family finances. Some people remain in real distress, and we should always stand ready to help when we can. So after listening to representations from Martin Lewis and other experts, I today confirm that the energy price guarantee will remain at £2,500 for the next 3 months. This means the £2,500 cap for the typical household will remain in place when energy prices remain high ahead of an expected fall in prices from July. This measure will save the average family a further £160 on top of the energy support measures already announced. The second measure concerns over 4 million households on prepayment meters. They're often the poorest households, but they currently pay more than comparable customers on direct debit. Ofgem has already agreed with suppliers a temporary suspension to forced installations of prepayment meters, but today I go further and confirm we will bring their charges in line with comparable direct debit charges. Under a Conservative government, the energy premium paid by our poorest customers, our poorest households, is coming to an end. Next, I have listened to representations from the honourable members for East Devon, North Cornwall, Colne Valley and Central Suffolk and North Ipswich about the risk to community facilities, especially swimming pools, caused by high costs. When times are tough, such facilities matter even more. So today I am providing a £63 million fund.
Order! We want to hear what the Chancellor of the Exchequer is actually saying. Enough. Chancellor.
Today I am providing a £63 million fund to keep our public leisure centres and pools afloat. I have also heard from my right honourable friend, the Charities Minister, and his Secretary of State about the brilliant work third sector organisations are doing to help people struggling in tough times. They can often reach people in need that central or local government cannot. So I will give his department £100 million to support thousands of local charities and community organisations do their fantastic work. I also note the personal courage of one of my predecessors, my right honourable friend from Bromsgrove, in talking about the tragedy of suicide and the importance of preventing it. We already invest a lot in this area, but I will assign an extra £10 million over the next 2 years, nearly £1 million for every year that he's been in Parliament, to help the voluntary sector play an even bigger role in stopping families experiencing that intolerable heartache. My penultimate cost of living measure concerns one of our other most treasured community institutions, the Great British Pub. In December, I extended the alcohol duty freeze until the 1st of August, after which duties will go up in line with inflation in the usual way. But today, I will do something that was not possible when we were in the EU and significantly increase the generosity of draft relief so that from the 1st of August, the duty on draft products in pubs will be up to 11 pence lower than the duty in supermarkets. It's a differential a Conservative government will maintain as part of a new Brexit pubs guarantee. Madam Deputy Speaker, British ale is warm, but the duty on a pint is frozen. And even better, thanks to the Windsor framework negotiated by my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, that change will now apply to every pub in Northern Ireland. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've heard the representations from the honourable member for Stoke-on-Trent North, my right honourable friend for Witham, and my right honourable friend from South Thanet and the Sun newspaper about the impact on motorists of the planned 11 pence rise in fuel duty. I noticed the party opposite called for a freeze on this duty. Somehow they forgot to tell the British people they have voted against every single fuel duty freeze for the last 12 years. Because inflation remains high, I have decided now is not the right time to uprate fuel duty with inflation or increase the duty. So here's what I'm going to do for a further 12 months. I'm going to maintain the 5p cut and I'm going to freeze fuel duty too. That saves the average driver £100 next year and around £200 since the 5p cut was introduced. Yeah! Our energy price guarantee fuel duty and duty on a pint all frozen in today's budget, that doesn't just help families, it helps the economy too, because their combined impact reduces CPI inflation by nearly 0.75% this year, lowering inflation when it is particularly high. I now turn to the Prime Minister's second priority, which is to reduce debt. Here too, our plan is on track. Underlying debt is forecast to be 92.4% of GDP next year, then 97.3%, 94.6%, 94.8%, before falling to 94.6% in 27-28. We are meeting the debt priority. And with a buffer of £6.5 billion, it means we are meeting our fiscal rule to have debt falling as a percentage of GDP by the fifth year of the forecast. As a proportion of GDP, our debt remains lower than the USA, Canada, France, Italy and Japan. And because of the decisions I take today and the improved outlook for public finances, underlying debt in 5 years' time is now forecast to be nearly 3 percentage points of GDP lower than it was in the autumn. That means more money for our public services and a lower burden for future generations, deeply held conservative values which we put into practice today. At the autumn statement, I also announced that public sector net borrowing must be below 3% of GDP over the same period. The OBR confirmed today that we're meeting that rule with a buffer of £39.2 billion. In fact, our deficit falls in every single year of the forecast, with borrowing falling from 5.1% of GDP in 23-24 to 3.2% to 2.8% to 2.2% and 1.7% in 27-28. Even better, in the final 2 years of the forecast, our current budget is in surplus, meaning we only borrow for investment and not for day-to-day spending. Day-to-day departmental spending will grow at 1% a year on average in real terms after 24-25 until the end of the forecast period. Capital plans are maintained at the same level set at the autumn statement. We will uprate tobacco duty and we will freeze the gross gaming duty yield bands. We're also maintaining the starting rate for savings and ISA subscription limits, and we'll bring forward a range of measures to tackle promoters of tax avoidance schemes. Madam Deputy Speaker, taken together, today's measures lead to a slightly lower overall tax burden for the rest of the Parliament compared to the OBR's autumn forecast. Other parties run out of money, but a Conservative government is reducing borrowing and improving our public finances. By doing so, we are on track to halve inflation, get debt falling and grow our economy, which I turn to next. Growth, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the Prime Minister's third priority and the focus of today's budget. "13 years ago, we inherited an economy that had crashed. But since they might want to listen to this, because since 2010, we've grown more than major countries like France, Italy or Japan, about the same as Europe's largest economy, Germany. We've halved unemployment, we've cut inequality, we've reduced the number of workless households by 1 million. For the first time ever, because of rises in tax thresholds made by successive Conservative chancellors, people in our country can earn £1,000 a month without paying a penny of tax or national insurance. The party opposite opposed those tax reductions, but they have helped lift 2 million people out of absolute poverty after housing costs, including 400,000 pensioners and 500,000 children. That averages 80 pensioners and 100 children lifted out of poverty for every single day we've been in office. And today we face the future with extraordinary potential. The World Bank said that of all big European countries, we are the best place to do business. Global chief executives say that apart from America and China, we are the best country to invest in. We became the second country in the world to have a stock of foreign direct investment worth $2 trillion. And London has just pipped New York and 53 other global cities to be the best place in the world for female entrepreneurs. Yeah. Declinists are wrong about our country for another reason, which is our strength in new industries that will shape this century. Over the last 13 years, under Conservative leadership, we have become the world's third trillion-dollar tech economy after the US and China. We've built the largest life sciences sector in Europe, producing a COVID vaccine that saved 6 million lives and a treatment that saved 1 million more. Our film and TV industry has become Europe's largest, with our creative industries growing at twice the rate of the economy. Our advanced manufacturing industries produce around half the world's large civil aircraft wings. And thanks to a clean energy miracle, we have become a world leader in offshore wind. Yeah. Other parties talk about a green energy revolution. So I gently remind them that nearly 90% of our solar power was installed in the last 13 years, showing it's the Conservatives who fix the roof when the sun is shining. Now, let's turn to what the OBR say about our growth prospects. In November, they expected that the UK economy would enter recession in 2022 and contract by 1.4% in 23. That left many families feeling concerned about the future. But today, the OBR forecast we will not enter a recession at all this year, with a contraction of just 0.2%. And after this year, the UK economy will grow in every single year of the forecast period by 1.8% in 24, 2.5%, 2.1%, and 1.9% in 27. They also expect the unemployment rate to rise by less than 1 percentage point to 4.4%, with 170,000 fewer people out of work compared to their autumn forecast. Madam Deputy Speaker, that return to growth has direct consequences for our role on the global stage. I am proud that we are giving the brave people of Ukraine more military support than anyone else in Europe. On Monday, we were able to go even further, with my right honourable friend announcing a £5 billion package of funding for the Ministry of Defence, an additional £2 billion next year and £3 billion the year after. Today, following representations from our persuasive Defence Secretary, I confirm that we will add a total of £11 billion to our defence budget over the next 5 years, and it will be nearly 2.25% of GDP by 2025. We were the first large European country to commit to 2% of GDP for defence, and we will now raise that to 2.5% as soon as fiscal and economic circumstances allow. And following representations from the equally persuasive Minister for Veterans Affairs, I am today also increasing support for our brave ex-servicemen and women. We will provide a package worth over £30 million to increase the capacity of the Office for Veterans Affairs, support veterans with injuries returning from their service, and increase the availability of veteran housing. But to be Europe's biggest defender of democracy, we must build Europe's most dynamic economy. That means tackling our long-standing productivity issues, including two in particular which I address today: lower business investment and higher economic inactivity than other countries. Too often, companies struggle to recruit, and even when they do, output per employee is lower. So today I set out the 4 pillars of our industrial strategy to address these issues. Colleagues will know from my Bloomberg speech, they all conveniently start with the letter E: enterprise, employment, education, and everywhere. I start, Madam Deputy Speaker, with everywhere. Our measures, well, they may not want to level up growth across the United Kingdom, but we do. This government was elected on a mandate to level up. We have already allocated nearly £4 billion in over 200 projects across the country through the first two rounds of the Levelling Up Fund. A third round will follow. Since we started focusing on levelling up, 70% of the growth in salaried jobs has come from outside London and the South East. And today we take further steps. Canary Wharf and the Liverpool Docks were two outstanding regeneration projects that happened under a previous Conservative government. I pay tribute to Lord Heseltine for making them happen because they transformed the lives of thousands of people. They showed what's possible when entrepreneurs, government and local communities come together. So today I announce that we will deliver 12 new investment zones, 12 potential Canary Wharfs. In England, we've identified the following areas as having the potential to host one: West Midlands, Greater Manchester, the North East, South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, East Midlands, Teesside, and once again Liverpool. There will also be at least one in each of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. To be chosen, each area must identify a location where they can offer a bold and imaginative partnership between local government and a university or research institute in a way that catalyses new innovation clusters. If the application is successful, they'll have access to £80 million of support for a range of interventions, including skills, infrastructure, tax reliefs, and business rates retention. Working together with our formidable Levelling Up Secretary, I also want to give some further support to levelling up areas under the E of everywhere. First, I will invest over £200 million in high-quality local regeneration projects across England, including the regeneration of Tipton Town Centre and the Marsden New Mills redevelopment scheme. I'm also announcing a further £161 million for regeneration projects in mayoral combined authorities and the Greater London Authority, and I will make over £400 million available for new levelling up partnerships in areas that include Redcar and Cleveland, Blackburn, Oldham, Rochdale, Mansfield, South Tyneside and Basset Law. Having listened to the case for better local transport infrastructure from many honourable members, I can announce a second round of the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlements allocating £8.8 billion over the next 5-year funding period. And following a wet, then cold winter, I have also received particularly strong representations from my honourable friends from North Devon, South West Devon and Newton Abbot, as well as Councillor Peter Martin from my own constituency, about the curse of potholes. The spending review allocated £500 million every year to the Potholes Fund, but today I have decided to increase that fund by a further £200 million next year to help local communities tackle this problem. For Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, this budget delivers not only a new investment zone, but an additional £320 million for the Scottish Government, £180 million for the Welsh Government, and £130 million for the Northern Ireland Executive as a result of Barnett's consequentials. On top of which in Scotland I can announce up to £8.6 million of targeted funding for the Edinburgh Festivals, as well as £1.5 million funding to repair the Clodagh Bridge. I will provide £20 million of funding for the Welsh Government to restore the Holyhead Breakwater, and in Northern Ireland I'm allocating up to £3 million to extend the Tackling Paramilitarism programme and up to £40 million to extend further and higher education participation. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, for levelling up to truly succeed, we need to unleash the civic entrepreneurship that's only possible when elected local leaders are able to fund and deliver solutions to their own challenges. That means giving them responsibility for local economic growth and the benefit from the upside when it happens. So this government will consult on transferring responsibilities for local economic development from local enterprise partnerships to local authorities from April 24. I will also boost mayors' financial autonomy by agreeing multi-year single settlements for the West Midlands and Greater Combined Manchester Authority in the next spending review, something I intend to roll out for all mayoral areas over time. I've also agreed a new long-term commitment so that they can retain 100% of their business rates, something I also hope to expand to other areas. Investment zones, regeneration projects, levelling up partnerships, local transport infrastructure and business rates retention, more control for local communities over their economic destiny, so we will level up wealth and opportunity everywhere. Yeah. Today's priority is the Prime Minister's promise to grow the economy. We've talked about making that growth happen everywhere, so I now move on to my second E, enterprise. We need to be, well, this has never been something of interest to the Labour Party, but for Conservatives, we won't rest until we are Europe's most dynamic enterprise economy. And under a Conservative government, that is exactly what's been happening. Since 2010, we have 1 million more businesses in the UK, a bigger increase than Germany, France or Italy. But I want another million and another million after that. So today I bring forward enterprise measures in these three areas to lower business taxes, reduce energy costs and support our growth industries. So let's start with business taxation. Conservatives know the importance of a competitive tax regime. We already have lower levels of business taxation than France, Germany, Italy or Japan. But I want us to have the most pro-business, pro-enterprise tax regime anywhere. Even after the corporation tax rise this April, we will have the lowest headline rate in the G7, lower than any period under the last Labour government. Only 10% of companies will pay the full 25% rate. But even at 19%, our corporation tax did not incentivise investment as effectively as countries with higher headline rates. The result is less capital investment and lower productivity than countries like France and Germany. We've already taken measures to address this. For larger business, we've had the super deduction, introduced by my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, which ends this month. For smaller businesses, we've increased the annual investment allowance to £1 million, meaning 99% of all businesses can deduct the full value of all their investment from that year's taxable profits. If the super deduction was allowed to end without a replacement, we would have fallen down the international league tables on tax competitiveness and damaged growth. As a Conservative, I could not allow that to happen. So today I can announce we will introduce a new policy of full capital expensing for the next 3 years with an intention to make it permanent as soon as we can responsibly do so. That means that every single pound a company invests in IT equipment, plant or machinery can be deducted in full and immediately from taxable profits. It is a corporation tax cut worth an average of £9 billion a year for every year that it's in place. And its impact on the economy will be huge. The OBR says it will increase in business investment by 3% for every year it's in place. This decision makes us the only major European country with full expensing and gives us the joint most generous capital allowance regime of any advanced economy. Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand the party opposite is reviewing business taxes. Let me save them the bother. They put them up, we cut them. I also want to make our taxes more competitive in our life science and creative industries sectors. In the autumn, I said I'd return with a more robust R&D tax credit scheme for smaller research-intensive companies. So today, I'm introducing an enhanced credit which means that if a qualifying small or medium-sized business spends 40% or more of their total expenditure on R&D, they'll be able to claim a credit worth £27 for every £100 they spend. That means an eligible cancer drug company spending £2 million on research and development will receive over £500,000 to help them develop breakthrough treatments. It's a £1.8 billion package of support, helping 20,000 cutting-edge companies who day by day are turning Britain into a science superpower. Yeah. And this government's audio-visual tax reliefs have helped make our film and TV industry the biggest in Europe. Only last month, Pinewood announced an expansion which will bring another 8,000 jobs to the UK. To give even more momentum to this critical sector, I'll introduce an expenditure credit with a rate of 34% for film, high-end television and video games, and 39% for the animation and children's TV sectors. I'll maintain the qualifying threshold for high-end television at £1 million. And because our theatres, orchestras and museums do such a brilliant job at attracting tourists to London and the UK, I'll extend for another 2 years their current 45% and 50% reliefs. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, an enterprise economy needs low taxes, but it also needs cheap and reliable energy. We have already announced billions of support to help businesses reduce their energy bills through the Energy Bills Relief Scheme and the Energy Bills Discount Scheme. We've appointed Dame Alison Rose, Chief Executive of NatWest, to co-chair our National Energy Efficiency Task Force and help deliver our national ambition to reduce energy use by 15%. And to support her efforts, I'll extend the Climate Change Agreement Scheme for 2 years to allow eligible businesses £600 million of tax relief on energy efficiency measures. But the long-term solution is not subsidy, but security. That means investing in domestic sources of energy that fall outside Putin or any autocrat's control. We are world leaders in renewable energy, so today I want to develop another plank of our green economy, carbon capture, usage and storage. I'm allocating up to £20 billion of support for the early development of CCUS, starting with projects from our East Coast to Merseyside to North Wales, paving the way for CCUS everywhere across the UK as we approach 2050. That will support up to 50,000 jobs, attract private sector investment, and help capture 20 to 30 million tonnes of CO2 per year by 2030. We have increased the proportion of electricity generated from renewables from under 10% when we came into office to nearly 40%. But because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, even under the Conservatives, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will need another critical source of cheap and reliable energy, and that is nuclear. Now, there have been no more powerful advocates for this than the Honourable Member for Innismon, Copeland, Hartlepool and Workington. They rightly say that increasing nuclear capacity is vital to meet our net zero obligations. So to encourage private sector investment into our nuclear programme, I today confirm that, subject to consultation, nuclear power will be classed as environmentally sustainable in our green taxonomy. That will give it access to the same investment incentives as renewable energy. And alongside that will come more public investment. In the autumn statement, I announced the first state-financed investment in nuclear for a generation, a £700 million investment in Sizewell C. Today, I can announce 2 further commitments to deliver our nuclear ambitions. Firstly, following representations from our energetic Energy Security Secretary, I am announcing the launch of Great British Nuclear, which will bring down costs and provide opportunities across the nuclear supply chain to help provide 1/4 of our electricity by 2050. And secondly, it's so good to hear Labour in favour of nuclear energy. did any. And secondly, I'm launching the first competition for small modular reactors. It will be completed by the end of this year, and if demonstrated as viable, we will co-fund this exciting new technology. Finally, under the E of enterprise, Madam Deputy Speaker, I come to our innovation economy, a central area of national competitive advantage for the United Kingdom. Over the weekend, I worked night and day with the Prime Minister and the Governor of Bank of England to protect the deposits of thousands of our most cutting-edge companies. We successfully secured the sale of the UK arm of Silicon Valley Bank to HSBC, so the future of those companies is now safe in the hands of Europe's biggest and one of its most creditworthy banks. But those events show that we need to build a larger, more diverse financing system where the benefits of investment in high-growth firms are available to more investors. So I will return in the autumn statement with a plan to deliver that. It will include measures to unlock productive investment from defined contribution pension funds and other sources, make the London Stock Exchange a more attractive place to list, and complete our response to the challenges created by the US Inflation Reduction Act. However, when it comes to our innovation industries, there are two areas I want to make progress on today. Nigel Lawson made the City of London one of the world's top financial centres by competitive deregulation. With our Brexit autonomy, we can do the same for our high-growth sectors. So today I want to reform the regulations around medicines and medical technologies. We are lucky with the MHRA to have one of the most respected drugs regulators in the world, indeed the very first anywhere to license a COVID vaccine. From 2024, they will move to a different model, which will allow rapid, often near automatic sign-off for medicines and technologies already approved by trusted regulators in other parts of the world, such as the United States, Europe, and Japan. At the same time, they will set up a swift new approval process for the most cutting-edge medicines and devices to ensure the UK becomes a global centre for their development. And with an extra £10 million of funding over the next 2 years, they will put in place the quickest, simplest regulatory approval in the world for companies seeking rapid market access. We are proud of the life science sector, which received more inward investment than any in Europe last year. Today's change will make the UK an even more exciting place to invest, using our Brexit freedoms and speeding up access for NHS patients to the very newest drugs. Today, with our talented Science, Innovation and Technology Secretary, I also take measures to strengthen our position in artificial intelligence, where the UK hosts 1/3 of all European companies. I'm accepting all 9 of the digital technology recommendations made by Sir Patrick Vallance in the review I asked him to do in the autumn statement. That means I can report to the House that we will launch an AI sandbox to trial new, faster approaches to help innovators get cutting-edge products to market. We'll work at pace with the Intellectual Property Office to provide clarity on IP rules so that generative AI companies can access the material they need. And we'll ask Sir Patrick's successor, Dame Angela McLean, to report before the summer on options around the growth duty for regulators. Because AI needs computing horsepower, I today commit around £900 million of funding to implement the recommendations of the Independent Future of Compute Review for an exascale computer. The power needed by AI's complex algorithms can also be provided by quantum computing. So today we'll publish a quantum strategy which will set out our vision to be a world-leading quantum-enabled economy by 2033 with a research and innovation programme totalling £2.5 billion. I also want to encourage the best AI research to happen in the UK, so we'll award a prize of £1 million every year for the next 10 years to the person or team that does the most groundbreaking British AI research. The world's first stored program computer was built at the University of Manchester in 1948 and was known as the Manchester Baby. 75 years on, the baby has grown up, so I will call this new National AI Award the Manchester Prize in its honour. Yes. Madam Deputy Speaker, we want the UK to be... We want the UK to be the best place in Europe for companies to locate, invest and grow. So today's enterprise measures strengthen our technology and life science sectors, invest in energy security, and for 3 years, but I hope permanently, cut corporation tax by £9 billion a year to give us the best investment incentives of any advanced economy. Yeah. An enterprise economy can only grow if it can hire the people it needs. Which brings me to my third pillar, after everywhere and enterprise. I said it was a growth budget, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we are talking about the E of employment. I'm going to talk about a difficult topic for the party opposite now, because Brexit was a decision by the British people to change our economic model. In that historic vote, our country decided to move from a model based on unlimited low-skill migration to one based on high wages and high skills. Today, we show how we will deliver that with a major set of reforms. The OBR say it is the biggest positive supply-side intervention they have ever recognised in their forecast. We have around 1 million vacancies in the economy. But excluding students, there are over 7 million adults of working age who are not in work. That's a potential pool of 7 people for every vacancy. Conservatives believe work is a virtue. We agree with the road haulage king Eddie Stobart, who said the only place success comes before work is the dictionary. So today I bring forward reforms to remove the barriers that stop people who want to from working. And I start with over 2 million people who are inactive due to a disability or long-term sickness. Thanks to the reforms courageously introduced by the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green, the number of disabled people in work has risen by 2 million since 2013. But even after that, we could fill half the vacancies in the economy with people who say they would like to work despite being inactive due to sickness or disability, with Zoom, Teams and new working models that make it easier to work from home. This is possible now more than ever. So for that reason, the ever-diligent Work and Pensions Secretary today takes the next step in his groundbreaking work on tackling economic inactivity. I thank him for that. And today we publish a white paper on disability benefits reform. It is the biggest change to our welfare system in a decade. His plans will abolish the work capability assessment in Great Britain and separate benefit entitlement from an individual's ability to work. As a result, disabled benefit claimants will always be able to seek work without fear of losing financial support. Today I'm going further by announcing that in England and Wales, after listening to representations from the Centre for Social Justice and others, we will fund a new programme called Universal Support. This is a new voluntary employment scheme for disabled people, where the government will spend up to £4,000 a person to help them find appropriate jobs and put in place the support they need. It will fund 50,000 places every single year. We also want to help those who are forced to leave work because of a health condition such as a back pain or a mental health issue. We should give them support before they end up leaving their job. So working with our Health Secretary, I'm announcing a £400 million plan to increase the availability of mental health and musculoskeletal resources and expand the individual placement and support scheme. And because occupational health provided by employers has a key role to play, I'll also bring forward 2 new consultations on how to improve its availability and double the funding for the small company subsidy pilot. There's another group that deserve particular attention, which is children in care. They too should be given all possible help to make a normal working life possible when they reach adulthood. Often they depend on foster families who do a brilliant job. So today I'm nearly doubling the qualifying care relief threshold to £18,140, which will give a tax cut to a qualifying carer worth an average of £450 a year. I'll also increase the funding we provide to the Staying Close programme by 50% to help more care leavers into employment, and I'll support young people with special educational needs and disabilities with a £3 million pilot expansion of the Department for Education's supported internship programme to help those people transition from education into the workplace. Madam Deputy Speaker, no civilised society can ignore the contribution that can be made by those with challenging family circumstances, a long-term illness or a disability. So today we remove the barriers we can with reforms that strengthen our society as well as strengthening our economy. The next set of employment reforms affects those on universal credit without a health condition who are looking for work or on low earnings. There are more than 2 million job seekers in this group, more than enough to fill every vacancy in the economy. Independence is always better than dependence, which is why a Conservative government believes with some exceptions, Madam Deputy Speaker. Independence is always better than dependence, which is why a Conservative government believes those who can work should. So sanctions will be applied more rigorously to those who fail to meet strict work search requirements or choose not to take up a reasonable job offer. And for those working low hours, we will increase the administrative earnings threshold from the equivalent of 15 hours to 18 hours at national living wage for an individual claimant, meaning that anyone working below this level will receive more work coach support alongside a more intensive conditionality regime. The next group of workers I want to support are those aged over 50. My younger officials have termed these people older workers, although as a 56-year-old myself, I prefer the term experienced. Fully 3.5 million people of pre-retirement age over 50 are not part of the labour force, an increase of 320,000 since before the pandemic. We now have the 23rd highest inactivity rate for over 55s in the OECD. If we match the rate of Sweden, we would add more than 1 million people to our national labour force. Madam Deputy Speaker, I say this not to flatter you, but older people are the most skilled and experienced people we have. No country can thrive. No country can thrive if it turns its back on such a wealth of talent and ability. But for too many, turning 50 is a moment of anxiety about the cliff edge of retirement, rather than a moment of anticipation about another 2 decades of fulfilment. I know this, Madam Deputy Speaker, myself. After I turned 50, I was relegated to the backbenches and planned for a quiet life, but instead I decided to set an example by embarking on a new career in finance. So today I take 3 steps to make it easier for those who wish to. It's going well, thank you. And today I take 3 steps to make it easier for those who wish to work longer. First, we will increase the number of people who get the best possible financial, health and career guidance ahead of retirement by enhancing the DWP's excellent midlife MOT strategy. They will also increase by 5-fold the number of 50-plus universal credits who receive midlife MOTs from 8,000 to 40,000 a year. Second, with my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, who has a deep personal commitment to this area, will introduce a new kind of apprenticeship targeted at the over 50s who want to return to work. They will be called returnerships and operate alongside skills boot camps and sector-based work academies. They'll bring together our existing skills programmes to make them more appealing for older workers, focusing on flexibility and previous experience to reduce training length. Finally, I have listened to the concerns of many senior NHS clinicians who say unpredictable pension tax charges are making them leave the NHS just when they are needed the most. The NHS is our biggest employer, and we will shortly publish a long-term workforce plan that I promised in the autumn statement. But ahead of that, I don't want any doctor to retire early because of the way pension taxes work. It's an issue I've discussed not just with the current Health Secretary, but a former Health Secretary who kindly took a break from WhatsApping his colleagues to consider it. As Chancellor, I have realised the issue goes wider than doctors. No one should be pushed out of the workforce for tax reasons. So today I will increase the pension's annual tax-free allowance by 50%, from 40,000 to 60,000. Some have also asked me to increase the lifetime allowance from its £1 million limit. But I've decided not to do that. Instead, I will go further and abolish the lifetime allowance altogether. It is a pension tax reform that will stop over 80% of NHS doctors from receiving a tax charge, incentivise our most experienced and productive workers to stay in work for longer, and simplify our tax system, taking thousands of people out of the complexity.
Order. Just because the Chancellor of the Exchequer is either unpopular or popular, we still have to keep the noise down because we still have to hear what he has to say. He has more to say. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a comprehensive plan to remove the barriers to work facing those on benefits, those with health conditions and older workers. That is the E of the employment pillar of today's growth budget, which brings me to the final pillar of our growth plan. After employment, enterprise and everywhere, I turn to the E of education. Over more than a decade, this Conservative government has driven improvement in our education system. We've risen by nearly 10 places in the international league tables for English and maths since 2015 alone. In the autumn statement, I built on this programme with an extra £2.3 billion annual investment to our schools. We're reviewing our approach to skills with Sir Michael Barber. We set out our plans to transform lifelong learning with a new lifelong loan entitlement. And my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, announced plans to make maths compulsory till 18. But today I want to address an issue in our education system that is bad for children and damaging for the economy. It's an issue that starts even before a child enters the gates of a school. Today I want to reform our childcare system. We have one of the most expensive systems in the world. Almost half of non-working mothers say they would prefer to work if they could arrange suitable childcare. For many women, a career break becomes a career end. Our female participation rate is higher than average for OECD economies, but we trail top performers like Denmark and the Netherlands. If we matched Dutch levels of participation, there would be more than 1 million additional women working. And we can do that. So today I announce a series of reforms that start that journey. I begin with the supply of childcare. We've seen a significant decline in childminders over recent years, down 9% in England in just 1 year. But childminders are a vital way to deliver affordable and flexible care, and we need more of them. So I've listened to representations from my honourable friend from Stroud, and decided to address this by piloting incentive payments of £600 for childminders who sign up to the profession, rising to £1,200 for those who join through an agency. I've also heard many concerns about cost pressures facing the sector. We know this is making it hard to hire staff and raising prices for parents. with around 2/3 of childcare providers increasing fees last year alone. So we'll increase the funding paid to nurseries providing free childcare under the hours offer by £204 million from this September, rising to £288 million next year. That's an average of a 30% increase in the 2-year-old rate this year, just as the sector has requested. I will also offer providers more flexibility in how they operate in line with other parts of the UK. So alongside that additional funding, we will change minimum staff-to-child ratios from 1:4 to 1:5 for 2-year-olds in England, as happens in Scotland, although the new ratios will remain optional with no obligation on either childminders or parents to adopt them. I want to help the 700,000 parents on universal credit who, until the reforms I announced today, had limited requirements to look for work. Many remain out of work because they cannot afford the upfront payment necessary to access subsidised childcare. So for any parents who are moving into work or want to increase their hours, we will pay the childcare costs up front. And we will increase the maximum they can claim to £951 for one child and £1,630 for 2 children, an increase of almost 50%. I turn now to parents of school-age children who often face barriers to working because of the limited availability of wraparound care. 1/3 of primary schools do not offer childcare at both ends of the school day, even though for many people a job requires it to be available before and after school. To address this, we'll fund schools and local authorities to increase the supply of wraparound care so all school-age parents can drop their children off between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. And our ambition is that all schools will start to offer a full wraparound offer, either on their own or in partnership with other schools, by September 2026. Madam Deputy Speaker, today's childcare reforms will increase the availability of childcare, reduce costs and increase the number of parents able to use it. Taken together with earlier Conservative reforms, they amount to the most significant improvements to childcare provision in a decade. But if we really want to remove the barriers to work, we need to go further for parents who have a child under 3. For them, childcare remains just too expensive. In 2010, there was barely any free childcare for under 5s. A Conservative-led government changed that with free childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds in England. It was a landmark reform, but not a complete one. I don't want any parent with a child under 5 to be prevented from working if they want to, because it's damaging to our economy and unfair mainly to women. So today I announce that in eligible households where all adults are working at least 16 hours, we will introduce 30 hours of free childcare, not just for 3- and 4-year-olds, but for every single child over the age of 9 months. The 30-hour offer will now start from the moment maternity or paternity leave ends. It's a package worth, on average, £6,500 every year for a family with a 2-year-old child using 35 hours of childcare every week and reduces their childcare costs by nearly 60%. Because it is such a large reform, we will introduce it in stages to ensure there is enough supply in the market. Working parents of 2-year-olds will be able to access 15 hours of free care from April 2024, helping around 500,000 parents. From September 24, that 15 hours will be extended to all children from 9 months up, meaning a total of nearly 1 million parents will be eligible. And from September 25, every single working parent of under 5s will have access to 30 hours free childcare per week. Madam Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Perkins, stop it.
Madam Deputy Speaker, today we complete a landmark Conservative reform. We help the economy, transform the lives of thousands of women and build a childcare system comparable to the best. A major early years reform for our education system, the E of education alongside the 3 other pillars of our growth plan: enterprise, employment and everywhere. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, in November we delivered stability. Today it's growth. We tackle the 2 biggest barriers that stop businesses growing: investment incentives and labour supply. The best investment incentives in Europe, the biggest ever employment package, for disabled people more help, for older people barriers removed, for families feeling the pinch, fuel duty frozen, beer duty cut, energy bills capped, and for parents 30 hours of free childcare for all under 5s. Today we build for the future, with inflation down, debt falling and growth up. The declinists are wrong and the optimists are right. We stick to the plan because the plan is working, and I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, sitting down, being congratulated by the Prime Minister and his other colleagues. Of course, we're waiting for the Labour leader to respond, Sir Keir Starmer. He spoke, Jeremy Hunt, for just over an hour. A lot of it we already knew, but just to recap some of the important figures announced there by Jeremy Hunt. He said the Office for Budget Responsibility, that scrutinises what Jeremy Hunt has to say, says the UK has swerved technical recession this year, although it will contract by 0.2% before returning to growth next year. Halving inflation, Jeremy Hunt says again that they have been told it will go down. They will achieve lower inflation by the end of 2023 and certainly come down to 2.9%. He also talked about the return to work, the big support for families, particularly that childcare offer, where he said there will be 30 hours of free childcare for eligible households with both people working at least 16 hours. That'll be 30 hours of free childcare for every child over 9 months, so following the end of maternity or paternity leave. Fuel duty freeze, yes, that 5p cut that we had from last year is going to be maintained, and the freeze will continue, he said, to the benefit of about £100 a year. And the alcohol duty, well, that will go up in line with inflation as expected, except for draft beer. It'll be 11p lower than it would otherwise have been. So that'll be cheered, no doubt, in the pubs. It won't obviously affect supermarkets, but it'll be something, as I say, that they will be pleased about in pubs across the country. He then said that actually, in terms of a growing economy, it will return next year, although some of the forecasts for future years have been somewhat downgraded. The corporation tax that has been talked about, and many in his party have criticised it, is going up, as we expected, from 19% to 25%, although interestingly, Jeremy Hunt said that actually the 90% didn't quite reap the benefits that had been thought. So that's over the last 10 years or so of Conservatives being in power. We will talk, of course, in a little bit more depth with the editors at the BBC about some of the individual measures. There was no discussion, as we thought, about pay. And, of course, those strikes are ongoing. But let's hear the Labour leader.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I say it's good to see you back in the chair?
It's looking radiant.
So, for all the hype, a budget for growth that downgrades the growth forecast. His opening boast was that things aren't quite as bad now as they were in October last year after the kamikaze budget. And the more that he pretends everything is fine, the more he shows just how out of touch they are. After 13 years of his government, our economy needed major surgery. But like millions across our country, this budget leaves us stuck in the waiting room with only a sticking plaster to hand. A country set on a path of managed decline, falling behind our competitors, the sick man of Europe once again. This was a day for ambition, for bringing us together with purpose and intent, for unlocking the pride that is in every community, matching their belief in the possibilities of the future. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, after today, we know the Tory cupboard is as bare as the salad aisle in our supermarket. The lettuces may be out, but the turnips are in. A hopelessly divided party caught between a rock of decline and a hard place of their own economic recklessness, dressing up stagnation as stability as their expiry date looms ever closer. And the figures published today spell it out. A year of stagnation, growth non-existent. According to the IMF, the worst performing country in the G7 this year. A prediction today confirmed by the OBR, and growth downgraded in years to come. This is a failure you can measure not just in the figures, but in the empty pockets of working people right across the country. 13 years without wage growth. 13 years no better off. 13 years stuck in a doom loop of lower growth, higher taxes and broken public services. Madam Speaker, our OBR makes clear today things don't look any better in the long run.
No.
A broken labour market holding back our prospects. 7 million on the NHS waiting lists. Ill health and disability on the rise. And the consequences, as we've just heard, deferred to the future. The classic short-term sticking plaster cycle. Decisions cynically ducked today, pain for working people tomorrow. It doesn't have to be like this. Britain has enormous potential. On science, innovation, technology, we should be leading, not lagging. We need an industrial strategy that removes barriers to investment. And the announcements today are nowhere near the mark. The lowest investment in the G7. That's their record. All our competitors know this. They're gearing up for an almighty race for the opportunities of tomorrow. And we've got to be on the start line, not back in the changing room, tying our laces. Now, he mentioned the war in Ukraine. And of course, on this side of the House, we stand with Ukraine and we stand with the government's response to Putin's brutality. We'll look carefully at the details of the military spending announced and we will support them. But what we cannot accept is the use of the war as a blanket excuse for failure. Our economy has weak foundation. Global crisis hit Britain more than other countries. Wages in this country are lower now in real terms than they were 13 years ago. The average French family is a tenth richer. The average German family a fifth richer. Countries which face the same pandemic, countries which face the same war. And the war didn't ban onshore wind. The war didn't scrap our home insulation scheme. The war didn't run down our gas storage facilities. They did. Decisions which hurt working people battling the cost of living crisis right now. It's been the same story for the whole 13 years. Always the sticking plaster, never the cure, and today's budget does nothing to change that. Again, we see a failure to grip the long-term challenges. No.
Order. People shouldn't just be speaking while the Leader of the Opposition is delivering his response. They should be listening. Now, we will now listen to the Leader of the Opposition. Sir.
Today's budget changes nothing. Again, we see a failure to grip the long-term challenges. No determination to create growth which unlocks the potential of the many. Working people being made to pay for Tory choices and Tory mistakes. Madam Deputy Speaker, these are the organising principles of Conservative economics. Judge them by their choices. The running down of our public services, paid for by working people. The disaster of the Tory mortgage premium, paid for by working people. The opportunities still missed for a proper windfall tax, paid for by working people. That's what makes the Chancellor's boasts about lower inflation so ridiculous. The idea that it's a tax cut. British people can see through that. They see their tax burden at its highest level for 70 years. And they know it's not the government that's lowering inflation, it's working people, earning less, enjoying less, It's their sacrifice that is helping to bring inflation down. And they deserve better than another cheap trick from the government of gimmicks, making them pay whilst trying to claim the credit. And even with the price guarantee, the average energy bill has doubled in 18 months. Because of their recklessness, the average mortgage payment is up £2,000 a year, a massive hit to living standards, however they cook the books. And yet, still, no real ambition on industrial strategy. No real ambition on the clean energy that will give us cheaper bills. No real ambition on house building. The same old Tory choices. Sticking plaster politics, no growth for the many, working people pay. And let's turn to his policies on the cost of living. Madam Deputy Speaker, I say his policies because there's a history to this, a pattern. Over the course of the whole cost of living crisis, time and again, it's Labour who bring the government not just to its senses, but to our position. Who first pushed for the energy price guarantee? Labour. Who first called for a proper windfall tax? Labour. Who first stood by people on prepayment meters? Labour. And who first said we should freeze the price guarantee this April? Labour. And we can go on, because it's also Labour that first committed to extending the fuel duty cut, a policy that in January he dismissed as part of a dossier that he published. So, for one poor soul in their research team at least, this really is a back-to-work budget. And a word of advice for the Chancellor as he promotes this policy in coming days. Use your own car, and for heaven's sake, make sure you know how to use a debit card. And I look forward to the Prime Minister promoting the swimming pools policy. Unlike the car, he won't have to borrow one of those. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the cost of living crisis is not over. And once again, they've left money on the table when it comes to oil and gas companies. Money that could have been better spent on working people. Politics is about whose side you're on. There are loopholes that urgently need closing. Even the former CEO of Shell admitted that they should be paying more. And the long-term plan just isn't there. The same old Tory choices, the same three principles, sticking plaster politics, no growth for the many, working people pay. And you see those principles at play in our broken labour market. Much of what the Chancellor said today focused on that, as well it might. The figures announced in this budget show how damaging the current situation is to growth, a long-term drag on our ability to create more wealth. Our inactivity levels are particularly shocking, up 500,000 since the pandemic, the worst jobs recovery since the G7. People unable to work because of ill health more than ever before. Now, we will look at what the Chancellor's announced today, because on these benches, we've long called for reform of the work capability assessment, for a welfare system that supports people with disabilities and long-term health conditions to thrive at work. The universal credit system must help people into employment, and childcare is a huge barrier to that. We've made the case for reform. But on childcare, of course, more money in the system is obviously a good thing. They obviously didn't listen to when he said he's actually going to do it.
They won't be here.
And we've seen the Tories expand so-called free hours before. And as parents up and down the country know, it's no use having more free hours if you can't access them. And it pushes the cost for parents outside the offer. That's what we've seen before. And on pensions, he made a big spending commitment, which will benefit those with the broadest shoulders, where many people are struggling to save into their pension. We needed a fix for doctors, but the announcement today is a huge giveaway to some of the very wealthiest. The only permanent tax cut in the budget is for the richest 1%. How can that possibly be a priority for this government? The truth is our labour market is the cast iron example of an economy with weak foundations. Our crisis in participation simply hasn't happened elsewhere, not to this extent. It's a feature of Tory Britain, and global excuses won't wash. We need a wider reform agenda. Instead of making working people pay, we need to make work pay. Move on from growth that's based on insecure, low-paid jobs to growth which comes from good work, from strong employment rights that can deliver higher productivity, growth from the many, for the many, that makes people better off in all parts of our country. I welcome his announcement on devolution deals. The principle that we should push power out of Westminster is fully supported on this side of the House. In fact, we want him to go further. Communities beyond Birmingham and Manchester deserve the right powers and the same powers to drive growth as well. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor is a former Health Secretary, a published author on health, no less. He gave me a signed copy of his book. He knows that growth needs an NHS fit for the future. And no country can be fit for work when there are 7 million people on hospital waiting lists.
Nothing to say about that.
So I was waiting for him to match Labour's ambition. Waiting for him to match our plan to train more doctors and nurses, to tackle the capacity crisis. A policy he publicly praised just 15 days before he became Chancellor. And yet it never came. And Madam Deputy Speaker, if there was ever a symbol of the poverty of ambition, that is it. Because the reality is the country getting sicker is a country getting poorer. And a country getting poorer is a country getting sicker. Health and wealth must go together. Britain can't afford to be the sick man of Europe. Britain can't afford the Tories. And there is another way. On these benches, we understand institutions must be respected, constraints accepted, that fiscal rules should be sound and followed rigorously, that every pound is precious and must not be wasted. But they want to shout about their record. Let them shout. Wages lower, taxes higher, borrowing higher, debt higher. Their chaos has a cost. Certainty is vital for the growth we need, essential for businesses and investors in our country. As we've spelt out, compared with a blanket cut to corporation tax, investment allowances are the right approach. But the question many businesses will ask today is, how long before the wind blows again and we all go through this again? And that's what they don't understand about business investment. Their endless fighting on tax is bad for growth in and of itself. Madam Deputy Speaker, real stability means that taxes don't go up and down like yo-yos. That R&D tax credit regime doesn't get overhauled twice in 6 months.
Order. OK, that's enough. I now can't hear the right honourable gentleman at all. Exactly. And it's nothing to do with being old. No. Quiet. Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you. Let me give an example of that instability. It's a bit of a fraught subject at the moment, but when he was Culture Secretary, the Chancellor apparently took some lessons on the rules of football. So let me provide a refresher. The amount of times his government has broken their fiscal rules, 11. That's one football team. The amount of times they've changed corporation tax policy, 22. That's 2 teams. You've got a game. But if he wants the post-max analysis, he'll have to consult the experts. Back on his screens and ours this weekend, I know the whole House will want to applaud that. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, a budget is not just about the choices made, but the choices ignored. Britain needs more than certainty for growth. That's the least we should expect. We need change, stability and success. Anyone listening to this and worried about NHS waiting lists, it's about crime going unpunished. They don't want to hear about the waiting list. They don't want to hear about the crime going unpunished. House building rates falling. Don't want to hear about that either, I suppose, do you? They will have heard very little that makes them feel hopeful about our future. They could have used sensible taxation policies on non-DOMs or oil and gas companies and made the money work for working people, tackled the vested interests that gum up our planning system and shown real ambition on the investment we need to turn us into a green growth superpower. And that was the test today. Can we move beyond the usual sticking plaster solutions, set a new direction for growth that serves the interests of working people? But I'm afraid the verdict on this budget is clear. They won't offer change because they can't. And so our course is set. Managed decline, Britain going backwards, the sick man of Europe once again. That's the Britain they've created, and they should look it in the eye. Because today's figures on growth put their failures up in lights. After 13 years of Tory sticking plaster politics, 13 years of no growth for the many, 13 years of being asked to pay, working people are entitled to ask, am I any better off than I was before? And after 13 years, with no excuses left, nobody left to blame, no ambition or answers, the resounding answer is no, and they know it.
And that is the end of Keir Starmer, the Labour leader's response to the Chancellor's budget from Jeremy Hunt. He spoke for about 15 minutes or so, saying that the country was paying for 13 years of Tory failure, that the global crises that have hit everybody have hit the UK worse than other comparable countries, that the Tories had made choices that had harmed people and they had made mistakes. He also said, of course, that they were stealing a lot of Labour's policies on everything from the windfall tax to the offer that we heard there on childcare, although as of yet Labour hadn't actually set out precisely what they were going to do. He raises a big issue of concern for a lot of people, and those are the backlogs, the waiting lists in the NHS. This is a BBC Politics Live special. We're with you until 3 o'clock with our experts here, Chief Political Correspondent for the BBC, Nick Eardley, Faisal Islam, the Economics Editor. We have Simon Jack, Business Editor, and Paul Johnson has joined us, the Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Welcome to you, and we'll come to you in just a moment. We can announce and confirm much of what we had expected in those key measures from Jeremy Hunt. Inflation to fall to 2.9% by the end of this year. Confirmation of that rise in corporation tax from 19 to 25%, free childcare for working parents extended, and the energy price guarantee maintained for another 3 months at £2,500. The pension lifetime allowance, yes, well, it wasn't just increased, it's been abolished. Defence spending increase of £11 billion over 5 years. That will take defence spending to 2.25%. 12 new entrepreneurial investment zones, and fuel duty frozen for the 13th consecutive year at a cost of around £6 billion. There's more. Alcohol duty to rise with inflation, as it normally does from August, but duty frozen on draft products in pubs. Full capital expensing introduced for 3 years. We'll get Simon Jack to explain what that will include, and £400 million for new levelling up partnerships. As you can see, a raft of measures from the Chancellor's. New apprenticeships for over 50s. A £100 million fund announced for local charities. A new £1 million prize for artificial intelligence research, very much at the core of the science and research part of this budget, and an extra £200 million, importantly, for pothole funds next year. Let's just get initial thoughts from editors before we talk to Paul Johnson. Nick Eardley. I suppose the most striking thing was at the beginning, when the Chancellor said that the UK will avoid what they call a technical recession. But, let's be frank, there is going to be a 0.2% contraction this year before growth returns. What did you make, generally, of the budget?
Given that Rishi Sunak has staked much of his premiership on improving the economic picture from the one he inherited, there was some OK news in there, maybe a slightly better picture, with the exception of the fact that the growth figures for the latter part of the forecasts are actually down from what they were in the autumn. Look, I mean, essentially the Prime Minister's made his big calls financially for this year about what he thinks he can do to help households and persuade them. The energy bills, the childcare, the fuel duty spending, all really important and will matter a lot to a lot of people at home. There are some big supply side reforms as well. But there's one figure that's jumped out at me already from flicking through the dense OBR book. It's on page 8. You might remember that after the autumn statement, we were talking a lot about disposable income for households and how that was going to plummet. It's not as bad as it was, but Keir Starmer finished there saying people will ask themselves, are we better off? This says that in the 2 financial years, 22-23 and 23-24, there'll be a cumulative 5.7% in real disposable income for households. I suspect that's something the Prime Minister will continue to be asked about. And you've already heard the 2 attack lines you're going to get, I think, quite a lot from Labour. One is about those forecasts for after 2025 being less than they were in the autumn, and the other is the decision to get rid of the lifetime allowance altogether. They will portray that as another tax cut for the wealthy.
It is always the political question, which is, do you feel better off now when it comes to the next election than you did when a party takes office? Yes, the context is difficult for the government because of the external shocks that we talked about. But Nick is right about the sort of downgrading of growth in the sort of final 2 years, certainly into the election and out the other side. How positive or optimistic are you?
So I think there's a broad strategic set of decisions the government has made. Growth is better than expected from November. They've got a windfall. They've spent it. Let me be clear about what that means. They've borrowed the money that within their rules they have the space to borrow, right? And that's roughly about 20 billion a year. That's not that's
insignificant.
Not insignificant, and they've prioritised, and we'll come on to this, business investment, getting people back to work, a bit of defence, as we said. And the general picture on growth is a kind of like micro-surgery of lots of different types of measures on business investment, on getting workers back in, to try and shift the dial on growth so that it makes an impact, I think, before the next election. Some of the biggest measures simply run out just after the election, and then that's why you get growth kind of going down a bit afterwards. So, it's maximising the bang for the buck early, as you might expect, trying to get a deliverable, noticeable, visible impact, I think, for voters by the time of that election, which we expect, late 2024, early 25.
What was your takeaway?
Well, they were under enormous pressure to replace something called the super deduction, which meant that for every £1 you invest, you got £1.30 in tax relief. That was coming to an end in March. They did it as expected. That means that any pound you spend on IT, plant and machinery, you can knock off your profits for tax purposes. So you're getting a tax deduction. It's going to cost them £9 billion a year for the next 3 years when it then runs out. But they did say they want to keep it in place as soon as it's responsible to do so. So it's a big chunk of money. It's actually cheaper than the thing it replaces, which was £12 billion a year. So I think businesses will welcome that. I think Faisal's right. That business investment boom you're going to see, hopefully, the government will hope, over the next 3 years. After that, it disappears, and maybe that could explain to some extent why you're seeing weaker growth after that business investment boom peters out. And obviously, there is the point that actually the economy is going to be a bit better in the short term than we thought, which means that the percentage changes towards the end of the period will be a bit lower anyway, because you're changing the base on which they're on their base. So I think that the businesses will largely welcome the fact they've got something in place for the next 3 years. Quite an admission. As Faisal said, there would be some omissions here. There was an admission that having a low headline corporation tax rate does nothing for business investment, and it hadn't worked over the past few years, and said that even though we've got a lower headline tax rate, even at 25% than European countries, we still don't get as much investment as others do. So that's what they're trying to address with this.
Let's talk about the impact on households and families. The Chancellor, Paul Johnson, said that measures to help people this year and next amount to £94 billion. That inflation will fall. He says the Office for Budget Responsibility underlines their hope that inflation will fall to 2.9% by the end of this year. So prices will come down for people. But the issue of pay still hasn't been resolved. That wasn't talked about. We know there are strikes ongoing. There was nothing about dealing with people's pay.
Well, let's be clear, prices aren't coming down. They're just expected to go up more slowly. So inflation is quite striking, actually, though. Inflation down to less than 3%, the ABR thinks, by the end of the year, from 10% at the beginning of the year. But nevertheless, as Nick was saying, over this 2-year period, households can expect to be substantially less well off on average than they were at the beginning of it, and looking at OBR figures, no better off than they were maybe a decade ago. So households aren't going to be feeling great at the end of this. And part of the reason, of course, is something that the Chancellor didn't mention, is that there's a great big tax rise coming in next month, which is the holding of personal tax allowances and thresholds where they are, which when inflation is very high means more and more of your income gets dragged into tax, or if you're a higher rate taxpayer, more gets dragged into higher tax. And that means £1,000 a year loss for basic rate taxpayers, so £500 a year loss for basic rate taxpayers, and £1,000 a year loss for higher rate taxpayers.
In terms then of getting people back to work, we know that there are 8.8 million people in the UK termed as currently economically inactive, as they're called in the official figures. Will, in your mind, the Chancellor's announcements, for example, on childcare, that offer on childcare, get significant numbers of those people back to work?
It's really hard to make a big difference here. Even the childcare package is expected only to get a few tens of thousands more mothers, mostly, back into work. Now, that's obviously uncertain, but we know that actually a lot of people don't even take up the what they're entitled to for 3 and 4-year-olds. So some of that won't happen. Some of that will just leave people better off, which they'll clearly be pleased about. I think the changes to pension rules will make very little difference at all to the number of people in work.
And the idea was to directly target that at doctors, for example, not leaving the workforce or even returning to work.
Well, I think if you want to target something at doctors, you need to sort out the NHS pension scheme. It's not sensible to change the entire tax system in order to sort out a problem, which is essentially a problem with the way that the NHS pension scheme works. That said, I think there's quite a lot to be said for giving people more flexibility to save for retirement, but there are all sorts of other things that ought to have been done at the same time. There are some seriously excessive bits of support through the pension system which weren't addressed.
What about the impact on economic growth, to go back to that? With these measures to get people back to work, even if it's tens of thousands that you'll talk about, is it going to have a direct impact on growth?
Well, that will have a little bit of an impact over this period. I mean, not a huge one, but it's difficult for governments to have big effects in the short run. But I think if you were to build on this, if budget by budget you're making things better in terms of labour force, in terms of the corporate tax system, then that does make a big difference in the long run. You can't expect to see a big difference just from something like this. But it is disappointing, for example, what is quite a sensible corporation tax reform, actually allowing full expensing, as Simon was saying, only for 3 years, leaves government companies with continued uncertainty about the structure of that system, and the way that that's just been messed around with year on year is actually more damaging than the overall level.
I think, can I just come in with something? Because in the OBR report, it says, they've scored it like this: as a temporary measure, we have assumed that the budget measure has no long-run impact on the capital stock. That's this total stock of business investment. No long-run, and that all the additional investment is ultimately displaced from future years. So what you get is you literally get a pre-election boom in business investment, and then it falls below the level that it would have done with the policy. And for the OBR to say that there's no overall impact, well, you know, people will be raising questions about the certainty. You've whacked up the rate. You've waited until right at the last moment to come up with this expensing to replace the super deduction. They could have done with knowing that if they're building a new factory for electric vehicles and all that sort of stuff. And now you've got this thing, is it going to end, is it not? Is it for a future government to work out? I mean, this expensing is a big, big deal. So you know, that's the OBR's verdict there, the government's own forecast.
Well, and looking again at what happens around election year and beyond, because, of course, budgets are political. And the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, when talking about public spending has been going up. It will go up less in future years, but a lot of it is going to go to defence. We now know there's that big announcement of £11 billion over 5 years to defence. What will that mean for other departments that are not protected?
I think 3 things here. First, it really is the case that public spending has risen really quite fast over this Parliament. So, you know, we are way past austerity. We've actually had bigger than average increases.
It's over 2.5%, isn't it?
Absolutely, over this Parliament, quite big. But penciled in for the next Parliament is 1% a year. Now, that's really very tight. We know that health will get more money. always does. We've got pledges on defence. Some of the childcare funding may come out of that. That's going to be still very tough for other departments. Now, that's not a firm plan. We haven't had a spending review, and whoever wins the next election will no doubt review that. But the reason that the Chancellor's put 1% a year in after the election is that then that helps make his fiscal numbers add up. So he's saying that his fiscal numbers add up, but he's saying them off the back of some penciled-in spending numbers, which I suspect won't be kept to.
Paul Johnson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, thank you very much for joining us. Nick Eardley, let's go back to the issue of inflation, because that is also one of the priorities, one of those 3 economic priorities of Rishi Sunak. He's confident, or Jeremy Hunt is confident, that it will go down to 2.9%. How big a deal is that for the government?
Well, look, I mean, the 2.9% figure, I think, is one that will absolutely have delighted the Treasury when they saw it. It's more than the target of having inflation.
Yes.
So it puts them in a much better place. So I think politically that will be seen as a bit of a win. The other thing to bear in mind, though, is everybody expected inflation to go down quite considerably.
So nothing that the government is doing in that sense.
But it's done it all by itself is the point, because the nature of inflation is an annual figure. So if prices are high this year, by the time you get to the same period next year, it's obviously going to be, and with wholesale energy prices coming down much more than expected, it's forecast deployment more than expected. So I don't think you can give that government an enormous amount of credit for that. That just happens as a numerical thing all on its own.
Right. Well, let's put that. Let's put that. No, we won't give you credit for anything. Let's welcome John Glenn from the government, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and of course a member of Rishi Sunak's cabinet. Welcome to you. Would you want to just pick up on that point? It's nothing to do with government. The figures were coming down. The figures were coming down anyway, and thank goodness is what people will say, from 10%, a record high, to 2.9%, but not until the end of this year.
Well, I think most people will be pretty relieved that inflation, which erodes their savings and the value of money, will be below 3% by the OBR by the end of the year.
But is it anything to do with you?
Well, I can tell you, you have to have discipline in how you spend money to avoid bringing inflationary pressures. And all the conversations I have with colleagues is about how can we spend money wisely, how can we prioritise investment in public services and make sure that we look after the public's interests.
Right, well, one of the areas you haven't spent, whether it's wise or not, is up for the public and voters to decide, and that's on the issue of pay. We've already talked about the numbers of workers that are out on strike, junior doctors, teachers, civil servants, London Underground staff. It's causing disruption and has done, and misery for the public. There was nothing on pay. Whether you have spent unwisely or not, you certainly haven't spent it on that, so we can look forward to more strikes.
Well, we're in negotiations with a number of workforces, and I welcome that, and I think a lot of progress is being made. But the question will have to be, where do we get to at the end of that in terms of the settlements? And you wouldn't, I don't think, expect us to be putting numbers in the budget for ongoing negotiations.
Are you close to a resolution?
Well, I'm not going to give a running commentary on conversations that are happening between my colleagues and unions.
I don't need a running commentary, but are we getting to a resolution?
I'm very pleased that some workforces are having conversations with the government, and I think that's welcome.
But do you think some of the money that you have, admittedly borrowing, could have been spent on trying to resolve some of these pay disputes? You've spent £6 billion on freezing fuel duty, for example. If we have a look here at the changes in pay since 2010, you'll see all private sector workers at 1.9%, and look at all public sector workers. I mean, on average, they've seen their pay go down nearly 8%. For teachers specifically, it's even worse. Their pay has been cut by 11% in real terms. Again, nurses' pay cut by 10%. You've been in office for 13 years. You've delivered a tiny pay rise in all that time. For some workers and for many others, a big cut. It's been a failure on pay.
Well, that's why I very much hope that we'll get to a resolution with these workforces.
But you admit it's a failure of Conservative governments.
I don't admit that. What I'm saying is that we are in negotiations. I'm not offering a running commentary. I want us to resolve those, as I think the whole country does.
Right, but it is a failure in the sense that workers have felt justified to go out on strike in the numbers that they have.
Well, I understand. With inflation at over 10% at the start of this year, people felt the pressure. And that's why it's really good that inflation is going down, because of the disciplined approach we're taking to our public finances and the way that we're managing the economy. And I think that a lot of workforces will be very pleased that inflation is going to go actually below the target of 2% next year as well. So, there is some good news, and it's because we've taken a very disciplined approach since the autumn statement just 4.5 months ago.
And that is obviously how...
can I just say, 4.5
Yes.
months ago, you had me on here and we were talking about a recession. Let's just not forget, the OBR today have said that we are not going to go into recession. Now, I'm not complacent about the challenges around growth in this economy, but I think we can draw some comfort from the fact that the OBR has also said that due to the measures in this budget today, they have put the growth forecast up higher than they've done in any other previous forecast.
Right. You say we've avoided recession. Technically, we've avoided recession. But the economy is going to contract this year, John Glenn, by 0.2%.
As I said, I'm not complacent. And the whole emphasis of the Chancellor's remarks today were about growth, getting more people into the workforce, making strategic investments in the industries of the future to ensure that we can beat those forecasts, as we obviously did with what happened in the autumn statement.
Right, but I mean, you've got a long way to go. Let's remind our viewers of where we are in the list of G7 countries. There we are, languishing at the bottom. This is economic growth since the pandemic at minus 0.8%.
And what about last year?
Yes, I know that the Conservative government... Well, this is taking... We can all pick statistics,
Well, we
can't
can. We can look at 2010 to 2020.
Oh, yeah. And what...
the last 12 years, the growth in the economy was 21% over 2010 to last year. Went up by 21% in the middle of the G7. Last year, we had the highest growth in the G7. Of course, I recognise the challenges we face this year, and that's why the Chancellor's brought forward the measures that he has today.
But productivity is still low. This is the 3 years since the pandemic.
I
All these countries have had the same challenges as us in terms of a war in Ukraine and in terms of the pandemic. And yet there we are at the bottom. And just before I open it up to the editors, it's also true to say that the growth forecasts have been downgraded for the years 26 and 27. So, yes, it recovers to 2.5%, sort of normal growth levels in 25, and then it drops off again, lower than the forecast.
Well, as a Treasury Minister, I regard all of these to be challenged and to be beaten, because it's important that we aren't complacent and that we have the energy to drive growth in this economy. And, can we talk about some of the substance of the budget? It would be good to.
So on the two core problems, Faisal Islam, Economics Editor,
yes.
Good to have you on, Chief Secretary. On the two core issues that you're seeking to address, that's the business investment problem.
Absolutely.
I think you'll agree that that's a problem, and the worker shortages issue. Both of them have been created on your watch. So you're undoing a policy problem created by a Conservative government.
Well, I mean, the challenge of productivity has endured over, I think, several governments. I think that's fair and reasonable. And I think George Osborne made a decision to reduce headline rates of corporation tax, but we didn't see the sustained investment. So
that was a mistake.
Well, in the course of time, I think it's proved better to go to a model where we actually change to still make our corporation tax rate most competitive in the G7, but have full expensing for investment. And we've given that for 3 years at 100%, with the intention, when we can do so, as soon as we can, beyond that.
But this is a bit of a fiscal fiddle, isn't it? Because the OBR literally say there's no long-run impact on the capital stock from the corporation tax move. All the additional investment is ultimately displaced from future years. She's just stolen from the future, put it just before an election to boost the economy.
I think the Chancellor was very clear, Faisal. He said, we want to, as soon as possible, make that permanent. But given the costings in the scorecard by the OBR, that wasn't possible at this fiscal event. The option that the CBI said was to do 50% to start with, and if we wanted to go to 100%, we'd have then displaced it more in the first few years, because people have said, well, let's just wait until the next government. What we want to get that investment as quickly as possible, and we want to endure, and we want to make it permanent as soon as we credibly can.
The problem that businesses tell me is that things chop and change way too much. So you've got a super deduction, which allows you 130 pence for every pound you spend, and then that comes to an end at the same time as corporation tax goes up 19 to 25%, wiping out an entire decade of Conservative tax policy. And then you put in this full expensing, but it's only for 3 years. We may or may not.
That's not credible, is it?
And then after, that's not consistent.
We announced the corporation tax 2 years ago.
Right.
We are now delivering it. We've had only the top 10% pay that higher rate, which is still the lowest in the G7. We've got a taper for those businesses that have profits between 50 and 250,000, meaning they don't pay that higher rate. And the full expensing is a replacement of what has just ended in terms of the allowances that the previous Chancellor had.
Yeah. It's a cheaper replacement. Actually, it's less generous than the super deduction, which it's replacing. It's 9 billion a year, and the super deduction was running at about 12 billion.
Well,
a year.
not at the corporation tax rate at the time. Of course, corporation tax has gone up, so this reflects that reality.
Nick?
Can I ask about how this is going to feel for voters? Because it's all fine and well talking about economic growth, but this document, the OBR, shows people are going to be paying more tax than they've ever paid. It's going to keep going
But less
up.
than France.
Well, let's talk about what it means for people in the UK. More tax is going to be paid by the public. It's going to continue to go up because you've frozen the thresholds. But at the same time, household disposable income is going to be 6% lower by the end of 2024. That's the legacy of this government, isn't it?
Well, the sad reality is that we had a once-in-a-100-year pandemic where we borrowed £300 billion. When we came out of that, we had the first war on the continent of Europe since the Second World War, necessitating spending 80 to 90 billion supporting families, which we've also in today's budget announced we're going to continue to support for another 3 months. That has implications. £110 billion we're spending, more than any other department apart from the NHS. That is the reality of the challenges that we face. And I don't think most people would think that COVID or the war in the Ukraine were the responsibility and fault of the Conservative government.
I suppose the point that I'm asking you is, it's all fine and well talking about this economic growth, but can you be honest with people? They're going to feel poorer in a couple of years' time than they do just now.
Well, all I can say is that 4.5 months ago, when I came into this role,
and I'm going by the OBR figures.
Yes, and so am I. We were facing a recession. The OBR say we're not facing a recession now. What we are facing is a growth challenge, and that is what the Chancellor has set out today, trying to get more people into work, more people to stay in employment, investing in practical interventions that drive the industries of the future with regulatory changes that we couldn't have made when we were part of the institutional framework of the EU.
One more on the politics of this. With the pension decisions you've made, they're going to cost about £1 billion a year within the next couple of years. That's a massive tax cut for the rich, isn't it? Why didn't you just focus this on doctors and on the clinicians, the ones who you're telling us...
It gets 15,000 more people in the workforce. And what you've found over time is that there are many people senior people in the civil service and in other professions who would face a similar challenge, and there will be legal risks around that. So our primary driver is to sort this out for consultants, where we think it has an impact on people willing to stay, but it also has a positive effect in the economy as a whole.
I mean, you did it a couple of years ago for judges and gave them a specific pension scheme because of retention issues. You could have done that for doctors and clinicians. Well, instead, this looks like a tax cut.
It's a bit more complicated than that. It's a bit more complicated than that when you look at different senior workforces that would then launch legal challenges around the lack of equivalence to it. And that's why we did it in the way we've done.
We've talked a little bit about tax. You know that there are colleagues of yours, Conservative MPs.
Last night, all the time.
Good. I'm sure they're delighted.
They like to talk to me.
They'd like you to cut taxes in order to get the economy growing. Is that what they're... Yes, but what did you say to them? You disappointed them.
Well, what I said to them is that, we have got to get inflation down. We've got to get growth going in the economy. We've got to get debt falling, and we've got to deal with the challenges that we face in the NHS and with the small boats. Those are the Prime Minister's priorities.
Yes.
We can't do everything simultaneously.
Right, and in the meantime, you've been a tax-raising government, haven't you? Is that what you said to them too? Because obviously you've raised it quite significantly. The corporation tax, as you say, we were prepared for. You've frozen the income tax thresholds. That's drawn a lot more people into higher tax rates. And overall, the level of tax in this country is at a historic high by this country's standards. So you've been a tax-raising government.
We've spent, borrowed unexpectedly billions of pounds, tens, hundreds of billions to support the British economy through a pandemic that we haven't had in 100 years. That's why we need to have taxes to deal with the investment in public services consequential of that.
Right, except that Rishi Sunak last summer, so we'd had the pandemic, We'd also got into the war in Ukraine, and he was still promising then to cut taxes quite significantly. There is an issue of trust here. Even your own politicians won't believe you.
I don't think so. We know what happened in the autumn, and we know that when the Chancellor came in, within a matter of days, he reversed the aspects of the mini-budget, and everything we've done for the last 4.5 months is to bring stability and to address the growth challenge. But I think most of those people viewing this will understand the fact that when you spend and borrow a lot of money, you can't then immediately give it all back until you've paid it back and actually got more growth into the economy. And that is, of course, what we're trying to do.
And is that, yes?
It's an interesting judgment you've made here, because you talked about, obviously, the increase in growth, avoiding a recession. That's given you more wiggle room, but you've then
just used the smallest amount of headroom in any OBR forecast.
But you've then used it all. You've then used it all. You know, you could have, and you've essentially, this is borrowed money. You've paid for the extra defence spending. You've paid for the extra corporation tax. You've paid for all this stuff. You've borrowed the money, and that's the attack you normally put on the opposition.
I think the challenge is when you face things that we've in a very uncertain world with the defence budget. With nuclear stockpiles directly for the Ukraine, which constitutes a significant amount of that immediate uplift. These are national priorities that we might not want to spend, that we have to spend.
You have borrowed, you accept. I mean, it's an attack you often put on the opposition.
You know the figures, Faisal, you know the figures better than I do. We want to bring debt down, but we've got to make judgments about how to live within our means and give clarity to the markets. We, yes, have a significant borrowing imperative this year. I think it's 246 billion from the gilt markets. Of course we do. But what we've got to do also is get growth in the economy. And these are the measures that I don't think we've quite discussed yet.
Not one penny more for public sector pay hidden away in some sub-clause or footnote here. Well, that you've just put aside.
I don't hide anything away. I have very straight conversations with Secretaries of State. We publish our affordability figures. We have conversations with workforces all the time.
Well, that's very reassuring to know that we're not hiding anything away. John Glenn, the longest-serving Chief Secretary to the
longest-serving Economic Secretary. I'm starting on the Chief Secretary.
Oh, you're sorry. You're starting on the Chief. But anyway, you've been in the Treasury for a long time. Thank you very much for joining us, as always, on these big fiscal events. We're going to be talking to Labour, to the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury shortly. But before we do that, let's find out the thoughts of our guests in the West Midlands and go to the Midlands correspondent there, Phil Mackey. He's in Sandwell. Phil.
Yes, back at the Hayden Hill Leisure Centre, where we've been digesting what's been said by the Chancellor today. Remember, an important election battleground. This has been Labour forever, but in the 2019 election, 2 of the seats were won by the Conservatives for the first time, well, really, in living memory. So a lot of things have been targeted at this area. For instance, there's a big regeneration project in Tipton, about 5 miles away, which will benefit from some of the money. West Midlands Mayor, the Conservative Andy Street, is one of the 2 mayoral areas which will get a bit more hands-on money. And of course, we're in a leisure centre where part of the ceiling fell in over the pool yesterday, which is going to benefit from that extra money for swimming pools. But I've got some people representing different businesses with me as well. First of all, David McWilliams, who's from BGS Haulage. You employ nearly 600 people. You're based here in the West Midlands in the Black Country. What are your big takeaways from today?
I think a bit of relief that the fuel duty is frozen. It'd be better if it dropped, obviously. There's some benefits for the fuel, the heating, etc., that will help our employees. I mean, ours is a family business. We like to ensure that our family, personally and in business, is a bit better looked after and able to cope. It's been a really tough time for people, and just concerned for the future. It's coming into the summer, the fuel cap is there, but we'll be using less fuel. What are we going to do longer term? And I think it's longer term we're all looking at. We want to know, we want a bit of stability and longer term planning, strategy to help us.
We've had a lot of Prime Ministers and a fair few budgets in the last 12 months. Do you feel a little bit more secure now?
A bit less secure. I think the instability created by all that has made people really nervous at the moment.
Okay. Back to Anne-Marie Simpson, who we spoke to earlier. Actually, you were looking forward to it. Now looking back, reminds everybody you run a gin bar and you distill your own gin as well. What do you think of what you've got?
Mixed. I think there's a lot looking forward. You know, the enterprise zones, bit disappointed that they have to be through a bidding process, so that'll obviously take some time. It's mixed for us as a business because we've got things like the beer duty going down, but everything else and all the other products that we serve going up. So that will be probably still a plus effect. I think we could have done more on the fuel costs for business. That is really difficult, and it has a big knock-on effect with suppliers. And the big gap for me is high streets. That what we haven't had is really any response post-pandemic. The high streets have changed beyond recognition. We're losing retail, and hospitality is in a really difficult position. Where does that leave our town centres? We need to be able to, you know, communicate. We'll have community spaces. We need to be able to have vibrant places to go, and I think that's a big miss, really.
And in terms of your staff, do you think some of the other things might help? So, for instance, childcare. Do you think that might get more people to come and work for you? Is that something?
I think it would be, yes, that probably is helpful. It's difficult in the nighttime economy when you've got people who've got children, but yeah, possibly. But I think where it may help people with families put a little bit more money in their pocket. So I think that possibly is a benefit. I think it's good on childcare, business-wise just less so, but we have got some positives in there.
And Sean Suku, who works for the food division, so a contract catering company, what do you take out of the Chancellor's budget?
Unfortunately, not a lot for me. I was hoping for, as I said before, a bit of an injection of optimism, speaking broadly across kind of SME owners. There is a feeling of everything seems to be going up. Fuel has gone up. Obviously, costs of employment have gone up. Raw materials have gone up. There's also a lot of lack of consumer confidence. Do we pass those costs on or not? That is a real issue. So ultimately, we're trying our best to hold costs where they are. Margins are squeezed. And then on top of that, we've got more corporation tax to pay. So for me, I'm a little bit unhappy.
You relocated from London up here because costs were bad. How do you think the West Midlands is faring, if you can keep it brief, but tell me how that is going at the moment?
Yeah, well, moving up, anything to keep costs down, that was my motivator to actually move up in the first place. So there is a little bit to take out of it across the West Midlands, I'd say.
And to both of you, you're relatively happy or relatively sort of indifferent about it?
A bit indifferent, I think.
Must be less happy, I think.
OK, lots more heavy lifting, obviously, for the Chancellor to do. Sorry about the pun, and eagle-eyed viewers for this special all-day may have noticed some of the same faces who were at the spin class earlier on, so we're working them hard today. We haven't got a great deal of enthusiasm, I think, so far. We'll be talking to a few different people with different perspectives a little later on.
Thank you very much for that, Phil Mackey. Yes, you are working them all very hard. We're working the politicians hard too, and I'm pleased to say we're joined by Labour's Pat McFadden, Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Welcome to you. So not an awful lot of enthusiasm there, perhaps, in Sandwell from those people talking to Phil Mackey, but recession has been avoided. Pat McFadden. And projections are that inflation will fall to 2.9% by the end of this year. It's going in the right direction, isn't it?
Well, it's probably the first time we've had a budget for growth where the growth forecasts were actually downgraded in years 3, 4 and 5 of the forecast. Quite a lot of this budget had been trailed in advance. We'd been reading, this seems to be the new style. We're no longer in the era when chancellors went into purdah and now everything comes out in advance. But one thing that wasn't announced in advance was this announcement that the only permanent tax cut in the budget would be for the richest 1% of workers. I don't think anyone in Sandwell or anyone else or anywhere else saw that coming. And I think it's an extraordinary choice for the Chancellor to make. There was a specific issue with doctors retiring early. There is already a separate scheme for judges where the government has recognised there's a specific issue.
Yep.
They could have gone down a road like that.
And we asked him about that. And
he said a fraction of the cost.
Yep.
But instead, they have chosen to give a permanent tax cut.
And we asked John Glenn about that.
The top 1% of
well, let's concentrate on what they did do.
Standout feature.
Well, let's
that wasn't briefed in advance.
Let's concentrate on what they did announce, which we were expecting,
well, they did announce
and that. To some extent, although we weren't perhaps expecting it to quite that level, was on childcare, something that you will welcome. As Jeremy Hunt called it, he's completing the reform started by previous Conservative government in terms of offering free childcare, or 30 hours to 3 to 4-year-olds. It's now being extended to 1 to 2-year-olds. It's a generous offer, isn't it? And it is probably going to have the desired effect of bringing people back into the workforce.
Well, I was glad the Chancellor brought up the Tory record on this, because, of course, I remember when the Labour government introduced Sure Start, and it was then dismantled by the Conservatives after they got into office. And I regularly can walk past the old Sure Start building in Bilston Market and see where we used to have a fantastic childcare facility, and there isn't one there at the moment. So I do welcome childcare coming back on the agenda, and we've been raising this a lot in recent months.
But we haven't heard any details from you, so will you commit to the same provision that has been announced today by the Chancellor?
On every question in the budget about will you commit to, the sensible answer after a budget is to take it away and look at it over a day or two, and that is what we'll do.
Well, which bit don't you answer? Because you've made a lot of childcare. We all listened to Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, making her announcements that childcare policies would be a centrepiece of the manifesto, or whatever you're going to campaign on at the next election. So you have thought about it. You've heard exactly what the Chancellor has said on childcare. Will you commit to it?
So the kind of things that we'll look at in it is, why does it take until 2026? This was supposed to help with the workforce crisis right now. In 3 years' time, that's quite a long way away from where we are now. We'll look at whether this is exactly the best way to spend this money on the existing system that the Chancellor's committed. And what we'd said in advance, and we'd hoped to bring it in before 2026, and we're not even in power, was that we would certainly have breakfast clubs in every primary school that would help parents. And we'd said exactly how we'd fund it through the abolition of the non-dom tax allowance.
And the childcare costs up front for people on universal credit?
Yeah, that's a sensible thing to do.
Right, so you do sign up to that, but you don't know whether you would commit to the 30 hours of free childcare for every child over 9 months at the end of parental leave.
After every budget, I come in here and I take these questions, and I've been doing it for a long time. And what I've learned is that on individual measures, it's usually better to examine them over a day or two.
All right, well, that might be a little bit of a get out there, people might say, but fair enough. Let's have a look at the overall tax burden, because we heard Keir Starmer yet again say, he uses this phrase, doom loop, high tax, low growth. So from that, can we assume that Labour will commit to lower taxes?
You can certainly assume that we'll go for growth. Because the reason
that wasn't the bit I asked you, to be fair.
Because the reason we have this interconnecting series of things, low growth, upward pressure on tax, stagnating incomes, they're all connected. And unless you get growth up, then you don't change that pattern. And it's the worst part is, you've got upward pressure on taxes and you don't even have world-class public services to show for it. We've got 7 million people on the waiting list. So you can't tax your way out of this. You've got to grow your way out of it. And that's why I think the growth forecasts being downgraded for years 3, 4 and 5 of the forecast, and even over this year, the economy is still being expected to contract, but just by not as much as we thought in November. Hardly meets the standard.
But if Keir Starmer says that he's going to make the UK the fastest growing economy in the G7, presumably if you win the election, so from 2024, how are you going to do that?
Well, you know, there's no single thing, but for example, if you look at what is happening in the United States right now, you've got a huge investment push triggered by the Inflation Reduction Act. You'll have a European response to that as well. We're just not on the pitch on that front at the moment, and frankly,
so what would you do? So it's a transformational thing that is suddenly going to turbo boost growth, make us the fastest growing. There's nothing that we've seen so far from Labour that would do that.
Well, we've set out our Green Prosperity Plan, which is really our version of the Inflation Reduction Act. That will bring good jobs to every part of the country. It really will fire up a transition that we have to do, and we have to. You know, this transition will happen anyway, but the question is, why not have as much of it as possible made in Britain, invested here with our technology, our leading universities? We've got to be ambitious about this, because at the moment, if we're not careful, The action's going to happen in the United States and Europe, but not enough of it here.
So are you suggesting a significantly larger amount of borrowed money to fund investment? I know you're going to talk about the windfall tax now, though, aren't you? But gas prices have fallen. You're not going to make as much money out of that anymore.
Well, there are still loopholes in that windfall tax, which we think, we've discussed them before, the investment allowance that allows people to set off about 90% of it for oil and gas.
It's not a loophole, it was a deliberate feature of the policy, wasn't it?
I would call it a loophole.
Well, you might do, but it was there so people would invest more in UK resources.
It doesn't need to be there. It's something that could be closed. But I do think that borrowing for investment in the green transition is a prudent thing for the government to do, because not only for the benefits, but also the cost of not doing it. The OBR themselves have pointed to significantly greater debt and deficit in the future if we don't make these investments.
But 28 bill is what, 1.5% of GDP, something like that. I mean, if you want to get up to the US standards, you're talking much bigger than that, aren't you?
Well, I don't see that we need to go beyond what we've said on this. Remember, the figure they've used is over a 10-year period too for the Inflation Reduction Act. Year on year, this can bring big benefits to the country. It's not the only thing we'll do. There are holes in the Boris Johnson Brexit deal that need to be filled. For example,
well, how are you going to fill that
recognition.
Tell us how you fill it.
Well, we would want, for example, to see a veterinary agreement.
That's
which
not
would help with our
green investment.
It's going to help with our
so
food
closer
and drink
alignment
exports.
on those things.
We would want to see mutual recognition of professional qualifications. We want to see more on skills with the apprenticeship levy. We want to see business rates reform.
Right,
it's not a one-club policy.
No, but actually,
it's a real effort to go for growth.
Right. You say it's a real effort to go for growth. We have. I forgot, actually. We have got, of course, an example of what Labour might do, because there's a Labour government in Wales. What's been the rate of growth there, Pat McFadden, over the last few years?
Wales in itself can't, with 3 million of a population, can't really influence the UK rate of growth. They're going to have
but I mean, it's a Labour government
growth.
that's been in power in Wales. What are the sorts of things that they've done? They've had the same, I think, broadly the same rate of growth as in England. If we want to see what a Labour government might do.
Look, no one's pretending that the devolved government in Wales has the kind of powers that the UK government has. I mean, that's the difference when it comes to this.
Right. All right. Nick?
Pat, I know you're trying to avoid committing to too much, but let me try you again. Would Labour reintroduce a maximum tax-free allowance on pensions?
Well, we are absolutely shocked at the government making this choice. It's deeply inequitable.
So you'd reintroduce it, presumably, if you took power?
Well, we'll set out our policies at the election, but this is not a choice we would have made today. This is extraordinary that the single tax cut that the government has gone for in terms of individuals, not talking about businesses, is going to benefit the richest 1% of the population. They could have had a discrete scheme for the NHS. Instead, they've gone for something that will benefit, when you think about all those people who are working hard at the moment, taking a real terms cut in pay. What's the priority in the budget? The richest 1%. That is not supposed to be the Conservative Party as it's marketed itself to us in recent times. But by their actions today, that's what they've done.
Do you accept that one of the biggest impediments to growth is there aren't enough workers, we need to expand the size of the workforce? What approach would you do? You said you sign up to the childcare provision. Would you perhaps add other sectors to the shortage provision list, bring in foreign workers in some sectors, as, for example, hospitality, construction, retail have all been calling for?
If you leave the pension tax policy aside for a moment, a lot of what the Chancellor announced today on the over 50s, for example, were things that we've been calling for. And we have been saying that we need more on childcare because the expense of it is a barrier to people entering work. So quite a lot of the other measures were things that we had been calling for in recent months. But what you have to ask yourself,
enough carrot and enough stick? I'm just looking here at one of the things that Chancellor said. Sanctions will be applied more rigorously to those who fail to meet strict work search requirements or choose not to take up a reasonable job offer. Is that your policy?
Well, sanctions have been part of the system for a long time. I believe you need a balance here. For a certain number of people, you will need to do that. But I think most people, it's a balance of support and sanctions is the right way to go about this. So the But before we finish on workforce, there's a really important point here. If we look at all the people who've left the labour market since COVID and the shortage of workers that businesses are seeing, is it really the case that the government is telling us that a huge proportion of that is people rubbing up against their £1 million.
All right, well, you have made that point. You've made that point.
That is a tiny proportion of the workforce problem.
Thank you very much for joining us today with your reaction to today's budget. That's the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Let's go to Central Lobby because Stephen Flynn, the SNP's Westminster leader, has been waiting patiently. Hello to you, Stephen. Just give us your reaction, first of all, to what you've heard.
I think it's a bit of a letdown, if I'm honest, for hard-pressed families up and down Scotland and indeed across the rest of the UK. They'll be looking at it going, it's the biggest thing the Chancellor can offer, a freeze on energy bills, particularly given the fiscal headroom that was available to him. And that's particularly pertinent for folk in Scotland because average energy bills in Scotland haven't been £2,500, they've been closer to £3,500, which of course is a near tripling in the last couple of years alone. And on top of that, we know that the Chancellor is getting rid of the £400 energy rebate that was in place. So no matter which way you turn when it comes to your household domestic energy bills, the Tories have let folk down today, and that's not good enough.
What about the Chancellor's decision to increase alcohol duties? They're going to go up with inflation.
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, there's obviously a specific issue in respect of Scotch whisky, which I need to go and look at. But I need to go and look at that in a little bit more detail.
You know, the Scotch Whisky Association have been calling on the Chancellor to extend the freeze because it supports an awful lot of jobs, that sector. But you think that's the right thing to do?
Broadly speaking, I think I need to go and look at the detail of what the Chancellor has set out, because the devil, as we know when it comes to the Chancellor's statements, is always in the detail. But the Scotch Whisky Association, indeed other drinks manufacturers, have been looking for reform of alcohol duties. Now, if the Chancellor is just doing a blanket increase, there's of course concern that's going to be there for the Scotch whisky industry, but I would want to have the opportunity to look at that in full detail.
Yes, because we're just being told Scotch whisky hit with historic blow after tax increase. So you better have a very quick look, hadn't you, Stephen, after...
I bet I'll do that, Joe, but I've obviously just came direct from the chamber.
Yes, and perhaps have a whisky before they go up. You've said in the past that the Chancellor should increase the windfall tax on oil and gas further. How does that go down with your constituents, particularly in Aberdeen, again, many of whom work in the sector?
Well, of course, Scotland produces 6 times more gas than it consumes, and almost 80% of our electricity comes from net zero sources already. We're in a very strong energy position. Now, the issue in respect of a windfall tax is one of much debate in my neck of the woods, and understandably so. But what my constituents want to know is that there's going to be jobs and security for those jobs long into the future. So what we need there is a just transition, and the Chancellor could have stood up today and invested in carbon capture and storage in the north east of Scotland. He chose not to do that. Indeed, he's continued down the path of previous Chancellors of backing projects in the north east of England. There's tens of thousands of jobs associated with carbon capture and storage in the north east of Scotland, and the Chancellor refused to make that commitment today again.
But as you have said, you used the word transition, these things can take time. And it was only February last year you said that such a tax, an extended windfall tax on oil and gas, would mean that your constituents in the meantime would lose their jobs. Were you wrong about that?
Yeah, of course I wanted to see the full proposal that was coming forward, but the big difference between February last year and what happened in the months that followed was the price of gas absolutely skyrocketed to a point where it was completely unsustainable for both households and businesses to deal with the cost pressures that were being placed upon them. So it was absolutely right to introduce that windfall tax. There's a reason why I called for it almost immediately and why we continue to back it. But the big thing is making sure that energy transition works. Now, the pathway that the Chancellor is going down in respect of nuclear is wrong-headed. It's an open chequebook to an industry which can't deliver early and efficient energy resources. That's in stark contrast to offshore wind, tidal, onshore wind in Scotland, and indeed hydro pump storage, which should have got backing from the Chancellor today, but he chose not to do that. Politics is all about choices, Joe. The Chancellor made the wrong ones today.
Indeed, and you have perhaps changed your position somewhat when it comes to whether or not it would be good for your constituents or not. But let's talk about the backdrop to the SNP, because, of course, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has announced that she is stepping down. We interviewed Humza Yousaf, your colleague, the Health Minister, and you are backing him. He's had a lot of big-name backers, so why isn't he miles ahead in terms of the polls?
Well, I think the polls vary depending on what you're looking at, whether it's SNP members. I think Humza is in the lead when it comes to the wider population. I think it's neck and neck. But from my point, and my reason for backing Humza was very clear. I believe in his economic plans. I think his proposals in respect of childcare, his proposals in respect of that green industrial revolution that we think can happen in Scotland, something that we've just spoken about there, which is obviously very close to my heart, are incredibly important. I think Humza is best placed to deliver that, and also to unite the SNP and indeed the country as we move forward through these challenging times.
So you're avoiding a split in the party, which one of your colleagues hinted at?
I don't necessarily think there's going to be a split in the party. You expect a robust debate during a leadership contest.
And it's been robust, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And you know what? We've not had a leadership contest for a long time. I don't think there's anything wrong with politicians disagreeing. The important thing is how you disagree. And you need to disagree without being disagreeable. And I've got no doubt that whomever becomes leader, and I certainly hope it's Humza, but I've got no doubt that when we get to the end of the month, the SNP will come together and we'll move forward together. That's what the party would expect of us, but more importantly, it's what the public would expect of us.
Stephen Flynn, we have Nick Eardley here in the studio, the BBC's chief political correspondent, who'd like to put a question to you.
Hi, Stephen. If Humza Yousaf is First Minister in 3 weeks' time, will you be urging him to introduce free childcare for 1- and 2-year-olds in Scotland?
I think Humza has been quite clear in respect of seeking to expand free childcare to 1- and 2-year-olds. Obviously, at the moment in Scotland, if you've got a kid who's 3 or 4, as I do, you get 1,140 hours of free childcare. Humza wants to expand that as a dad to young children himself. Indeed, as Kate is, we all recognise the challenges that face families, and it's important that we do everything we can to support families. So if the money is there to do it, then absolutely.
Presumably, you can just use the money that you get from Barnett consequences, the knock-on funding for Scotland of English spending, and use that to replicate what's been done south of the border. Would that be a good idea?
Well, we'll obviously need to see, again, the devil in the detail in regards to the Barnett consequentials that do come through from government in respect of this, and a lot of that will be predicated on when they choose to spend that money. But of course, if there's money that's going to be coming to Holyrood in respect of childcare, I'd have no doubt that the new First Minister would look to put that back into the pockets of families, because it's a good thing for families, it's a good thing for women in particular to get back into the workforce, and that ultimately is a good thing for the economy.
Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader at Westminster, thank you very much for talking to us there from Central Lobby. We can go back to Sandwell in the West Midlands, where Phil Mackey is there with some guests. Phil.
Yeah, hi again from the Hayden Hill Leisure Centre in Sandwell in the Black Country in the West Midlands. There have been a few bonuses given to this region in the Chancellor's budget today. A couple of things quite locally. Tipton Town Centre, a few miles away, is going to be getting millions of pounds as part of a regeneration project, and there's more money being given to the region, and that will be in the power of the West Midlands Mayor Andy Street to dish out as well as a result of this. We've got the old exercise class still going on in the background, but I've got a few different guests with me this time. So Adam Potter, retired, used to work for HSBC. You retired at a point where you couldn't pay into your pension anymore. How do you feel about the fact that this pension allowance has been scrapped now? I mean, do you think it'll have the desired effect, first of all?
I think for a lot of people who are coming up to making a decision to retire or whatever, I think it could make a big difference to them. I mean, there's obviously professions like doctors that have been talked about a lot. It will give them an incentive to continue in the workplace from it. For me, you know, I've been out of pensions for 10 years because of the lifetime allowance. I was ineligible to go into the HSBC pension scheme, which is one of the best schemes in the UK, because I was already at the lifetime allowance. So for me, it's actually not great, but for a lot of people, they'll be looking at that thinking, actually, that gives me some encouragement to continue.
But it won't entice you back into the workplace?
Unfortunately for me, it makes no difference to me, but it would have enabled me to maybe stay in the workplace for longer.
And do you think people in your same position, people in their 50s who have left the workplace, are going to want to go back as a result of this, or is it more a case of preventing people leaving so early?
I think it's preventing people leaving. I think some flexibility on contributions if they do some work, which means they can now contribute into a pension, whereas previously they would have reached a lifetime allowance. It does mean that they can offset some of the tax they will pay on earnings going forward. They can actually make additional pension contributions and, you know, maybe either replenish their pensions or build up some further savings for their retirement. So that is quite important for people going back into the workplace. The lifetime allowance probably is more important for the people who are thinking of leaving.
Still in at the moment.
Yeah.
OK, Damien Kirkman, the manager here. It's been a busy day. Thanks very much for hosting us. What do you take out of the Chancellor's budget? What are the good things and the bad things for you?
I think with more the support announced for, particularly for leisure, with regards to energy support up to 63 million. Obviously, any support is welcome, particularly up to 12 months after the energy crisis first began. We are keen, obviously, to learn how that will be distributed, considering how many facilities there are across the nation. Every week there's another pool closing due to rising energy costs. We operate 6 ourselves here in Sandwell, so any support is certainly welcome. And with regards to the energy price cap, then obviously that provides some further short-term relief for us all. But again, ask that question as to what's going to happen once that comes to an end again.
And what about other things that are not directly about leisure centres, but I was wondering about the childcare in terms of more people having potentially the ability to come and firstly work for you, but also come and attend the classes?
Yes, in terms of recruitment, certainly the extra support for childcare would certainly help. It is competitive at the moment to entice staff to work in this industry, particularly after the impact of COVID. So childcare would certainly, support would certainly help with recruitment and enabling people to take on roles and jobs they wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise due to costs. And in terms of the activities that we could deliver for those people to be able to bring more people into the leisure centre, particularly during the daytime, and allow them to exercise.
OK, thanks both of you. And actually, it's an interesting leisure centre, this one. They have 2,500 members, employ about 70 staff, but it's an old building, about 40 years old. And yesterday, part of the ceiling above the pool fell in, so that's had to be closed at the moment. But there is money for a brand new leisure centre, which will be built on this site, which will replace it. And actually, the provision in this part of the world, thanks to the Commonwealth Games largely, has really improved. So, mixed reaction. You wouldn't expect anything different, really, on budget day, and I suspect a lot of what the small print it contains will be what we're reacting to over the next few days too.
Well, Phil, you are echoing what the politicians have been saying to us, the opposition politicians, that is. They want to look, the devil is in the detail. Anyway, I hope they get that roof fixed quite soon. Looks all right from where we're sitting. Phil Mackey there at the Leisure Centre in Sandwell in the West Midlands. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to get more political reaction now, and we're going to talk to Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. Welcome to you. He is in Central Lobby there. Ed Davey, let's just talk about the childcare offer, first of all. That must be something you welcome. That is going to extend the hours, the free hours, to 1 to 2-year-olds as well as 3 to 4-year-olds, which will unlock, to some extent, the potential for parents to go back to work.
Well, Liberal Democrats absolutely support the idea of free childcare for people, but we're very worried when you look at the details. It's going to take a long time to deliver this government promise, not least because they've done so much damage to nurseries and childminders over the last 5 years. I think people will be worried that they want this free childcare, Liberal Democrats want it, but the government's plan for delivering it looks very weak.
What about the fuel duty? I mean, the Chancellor has decided to extend the cut to fuel duty and then freezing it, costing £6 billion. Would you have done the same?
Well, that's all very fine, but look what he's not done on energy bills. Liberal Democrats have argued...
But on that, because the motorists will be very happy, won't they? Particularly people in rural areas where there isn't and aren't the transport networks for them.
Well, we'd have actually liked to see more help for those in rural areas. We've called for a rural fuel duty tax relief to be extended, and they've not done that. But you've got to look at this package overall and the failure to give more support for people on their energy bills. Liberal Democrats wanted a cut in people's energy bills. There's a cost of living crisis out there. Millions of families and pensioners are really suffering. And if you look at the figures from the Office of Budget Responsibility, they're seeing a record fall in living standards last year and this year, and that's because the government isn't really providing the help on things like energy bills, which are so crucial.
Right, and in terms of the help, you responded very forcefully, like many politicians, in terms of the fallout from the mini-budget last autumn by Kwasi Kwarteng. Is it still Liberal Democrat policy to spend £3 billion helping people pay their mortgages if they have experienced sharp rises as a result of interest rates going up?
Well, we have indeed set aside some funds to help people with mortgages.
Is it £3 billion?
Well, what it is a fund to enable us to do that, to help people who are facing repossession. So we may not need to spend all of it, but we have earmarked that money because we think it's essential. They've cut taxes to the banks at a time when there are tens of thousands, if not more people, facing repossession, they've not provided the help for people who are facing repossession that used to be there, and Liberal Democrats want that help. And it's part of our package of helping people struggling with the cost of living, whether it's on people's energy bills, their mortgages, their rents. Absolutely vital that people get more help. I am genuinely worried that we're seeing a cost of living catastrophe. I think we're going to see millions more people going into poverty. I think we're going to see many more using food banks. We're going to see people who are homeless. We really need to do something. And I was generally thought the government seemed completely out of touch, completely tin-eared with what millions of people are actually facing at the moment.
I mean, when you say you are predicting that there could be millions more in poverty, just looking at the fund that you were putting aside, up to £3 billion, I mean, if you wanted to target that, you could spend that £3 billion on people on welfare, the poorest in society, or certainly some of the poorest in society.
I'm glad you've raised that, because we absolutely have a lot of ideas for how we help the poorest in society. I'll give you one, for example, warm home discount, which is a way of helping the poorest with their energy bills, some of the pensioners, disabled people, the most vulnerable people in our society. We've argued that should be trebled. So we target as much money as possible to those people who are least well off. I think other people need help with energy bills because we're at such a crisis. But you're absolutely right. We need to find ways to target those who are suffering the most. Liberal Democrats have done that. And I can give you quite a number of other areas where Liberal Democrats are on the side of people who are really struggling. And that is why I come back to this core point.
Yes.
The government seems so out of touch with what's really happening out there.
Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, thank you very much for joining us. And you can find plenty more analysis elsewhere on the BBC. The website gives lots of information on today's budget and what it means for you. And there was an awful lot to digest. You can find it at bbc.co.uk/news or on the BBC News app. We only have a few minutes more before the end of this Politics Live special, following on from the budget. Let me just get your final thoughts. I asked at the very beginning of the programme what you thought perhaps would be the overarching issue or story from this budget. Nick, what's yours?
I think there are four things that we're going to hear a lot about in the next few days, and I will list them rather than explain them all. That fall in living standards that the OBR is talking about, the tax relief for those with the big pensions, that's already becoming a big political row. Tax rates remaining at the highest ever, that's going to frustrate Conservative MPs, we're going to hear a lot more about it. And then the specifics of that childcare announcement. It's a big pledge, but many in the sector are already asking big questions about how you actually do it.
And also people saying it will take quite a lot of time. What about for you, Faisal?
I think a series of kind of think tank style announcements designed as surgery, as I said, to try and kind of jumpstart growth, which has been flat. And if they pull it off, things will feel better in a year's time. I see the sort of election as a kind of hidden feature in almost all the announcements.
Or not that hidden.
When they run out, when they have maximum impact, all that sort of stuff. But I think perhaps one of the really interesting things is a sort of contestable market in politics now that Labour are ahead in the polls, or have been ahead in the polls, and people looking at the comparative offer here.
The tax deduction for investment, that will be welcomed. 100% of what you invest in, you can knock off your tax bill. That will be welcome. There'll be a gripe. It only lasts for 3 years. We chop and change too much. We don't have the stability that businesses need to invest over the long term. And of course, this the tax break for higher earners, I think, will be a humdinger. People will be discussing that. I can tell you, there's got stockbrokers around the country are licking their lips.
Oh, right.
As I can see.
Well, on that note, that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much to my guests, my experts here in the studio, I should say. Bye-bye.